morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to do the meditation after the talk. So my talk will lead into the meditation. So pardon the little bit of a switch today. Specifically, Sharon asked me what my talk title was, and I was like, I wrote it down and don't remember it off the top of my head. But technically, I'm calling it Evolution as a Consciousness-Raising Experience, which has all to do with power. And there's a saying that we've all heard, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We've all heard it. And sometimes it's trite, especially if we're going through something and somebody just might, attempt to comfort us, might say, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And you're like, yeah, right. Easy for you to say. Well, congratulations to all you for surviving and being here, because I'm sure we've all been through times in our lives, tribulations, challenges, whether they be health, emotional, relational, work, where actually we felt like we were right there on death's door. And we survived. So congratulations for showing up and being here today. You've made it. So we all must be stronger for sure. So let me invite you into a brief visualization. And I just very briefly invite you to just review your life. I know this is really a big order, tall order right now, but we're going to go through this somewhat quickly and hopefully it won't be too hard to do. But what I'd like you to do is just for a moment and close your eyes if you feel comfortable and if this helps. Just go to the earliest time you can remember as a toddler. Just that kind of time of your life, and it's probably a little fuzzy. Our brain is still developing at that point, so not all of our memories at that age are very clear, but we have bits and pieces and they stick with us. And in that time of your life, just when you were a small toddler, just think about maybe any challenges or just anything that you might have been afraid of, right? Could have just been the dark, shadows, whatever it was, and just ponder it for a moment. Don't go too deep into it, but just make note of it, mental note of it. And then now move into this next stage of your life as a child. Maybe the first day of school, being in school, being at home with your family, and just for a moment ponder what challenges, what fears you may have had. Not getting too deep into it, but just making a mental note of those things, just for a moment. And then move into your adolescence, that awkward time when we struggle to come to an identity, when we're forming our identity, figuring out who we really are in the world. And just make mental note, not getting too deep emotionally into it, but making note of what the challenges were as an adolescent. And then moving into young adulthood. First jobs, careers, maybe first real serious relationship, school, higher education, whatever it happens to be. And what were the challenges at that point in your life? Just making mental note of them. And then moving into later adulthood. More relationships, more work, more family. Becoming more affirmed in your identity. Expressing yourself. Or maybe not expressing yourself. Maybe a challenge was that you are doing something that wasn't fully in resonance with who you are, who you were. And just feeling into the challenges of those situations. And then just let's all take one deep collective breath in together. Release it. And then just come back here now. Now with all of those little challenges that you made mental note of, just realize none of them killed you. Again, you're here. Congratulations. So you must be stronger. And let me take you into another brief visualization. And again, we're going to do something a little bit different, shift from that focus on troubles and tribulations, but shift into something a bit more that feels a bit more powerful. So what I'd like you to do is, in this visualization, again, close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, and consider the quantum leaps in consciousness that you've had in your life. And I'll give you a couple of scenarios to meditate on. The first one is advocacy. And advocating for ourselves can often be challenging, but if we're really moved and we're in the heat of the moment, sometimes we find it much easier to advocate for another. So consider a moment or moments in your life when maybe you experienced somebody who needed help, some sort of advocacy. Maybe they were being bullied. Maybe they were needing help at work, or it could even have been in a spiritual community or your neighborhood. And just ponder for a moment the power of advocacy and how you show up as an advocate and how you have shown up as an advocate. And just get in touch with that power of advocacy that we've all expressed at some point in our lives. And sometimes it's easier for us to do that for others than it is for ourselves. And then, as we consider another quantum leap in consciousness, think about your vocational self. And so many of us, as we have matured through our careers, come to a point where we almost demand of the universe that whatever it is we do for a living give us more meaning. And for some of us, that's actually completely changing careers. And maybe that's your story, where you just couldn't do what you were doing anymore, so you decided to make a switch and change. Or it could have been in your current job, just making the choice to do something more generative. Maybe you took on a protege. Or maybe you started some or participated in some volunteer initiative that was sponsored by your company. But whatever it is, in the midst of your working life, what were the quantum leaps you made in consciousness so that you could show up more authentically? And then the next quantum leap in consciousness that I'd like you to meditate on for a moment are changes in relationship. The beginnings of relationships. So we've all been around for so long on this earth that we've had relationships with so many people. Of course, it starts with our families, but then we develop friendships with others, and consider the beginnings of those friendships and what brought you to them and what was mutually attractive that brought two or more together in friendship, in community. And just ponder for a moment as your relationships matured and as you met more people, the increasing quality of those relational connections. And then as well, on the other end of the spectrum, just consider the endings of certain relationships, where being in relationship with a certain person no longer served either of you, and it was time to move on. And of course, these times are not always pleasant, and they can often be painful. Yet, we understand that in order to take a quantum leap in consciousness, sometimes it's time to release relationships that no longer serve us. And then finally, the last quantum leap in consciousness I'd like you to consider is your spiritual shifts, your spiritual practice. And whenever you walk into a unity center such as this, for the most part, most people don't grow up in unity. Most of us come from other faith traditions. And often we do this because we have a quantum shift in our spiritual consciousness that tells us wherever it is we came from no longer serves. And we're seeking something that fully appreciates and nurtures the deep spiritual power that we truly are, the Christ consciousness. And unity is one way that a lot of people find that and make that quantum leap in their own consciousness. And maybe this spiritual leap in consciousness has happened a couple of times in your life. Maybe unity is just one way you found that and you realized it, but there are so many others. You could have heard an inspiring talk by a speaker, read a book that changed your life spiritually, had an interaction with a friend, a neighbor, a loved one that shifted your spiritual consciousness in ways that are even hard to describe. So understand that these are all evolutionary growth spurts. So again, let's take in one deep breath in together and release. And then just come back here now. These are all evolutionary growth spurts. And again, we're all the stronger for having them. And that's why we're here today. One more visualization. And this one, again, I'm going to ask you to just look at this objectively and be neutral about it, because I'm going to have you visualize about your fears and resistances. So this isn't about getting into a deep emotional space with it, but just simply to make you aware or help you to be aware. And I like to consider all of those things I talked about in shifts in consciousness: advocacy, vocation, relationship, and spirit. Because in all of those quantum leaps in consciousness, usually we have some sort of fear or some sort of resistance, or both, that will challenge us to make that leap. And if you go back into those 4 things I asked you to visualize about: the advocacy, the work, the relationship, and the spiritual, just ponder for a moment, just making mental note, not getting too deep into it emotionally, but just consider. And maybe one of the easiest ones is relationship. Like the fear of leaving a relationship because of the pain that might cause. And I would guess that all of us probably stayed in certain friendships or intimate partnerships for longer than we really desired to, for instance, just because the fear of leaving, the fear of being alone, for instance. Yet, our own evolution almost demanded at some point that we must leave that relationship, for instance, or we must leave that job, for instance, or we must somehow change our situation, as fearful as that is, and as much resistance that we may have had around it. And the comfort around all this now, that the good news is that all of those fears and resistances, because we're going to continue to have them through our lives, whenever we're on the cusp of a quantum shift in consciousness, all of those fears and all of those resistances have power. And we may feel it in the form of helplessness. Yet, I'd like to shift our consciousness to say that those fears and resistances are power that's available to us in the interest of that evolution. So that power can be used consciously or unconsciously. And usually when that power is used unconsciously, it's when we let the fear get the best of us. And we continue to tell ourselves stories about why we should stay in the relationship, or why we should stay at the job, or why we should continue to practice an old religious style that no longer serves because of fear of, like, quote unquote, going to hell or whatever it happens to be. But all of that has power. And we have the ability to take that power of that fear or that resistance and turn it around for the good. because we are designed to express the greater good. Right? We read the 5 unity principles at the beginning of the service, and the first one is, God is the source and creator. Another way to, and we all have that in us. As sons and daughters of God, we have that spark of divinity in us. So therefore, we are here. If God is good, we are here to express the good, despite our fears and resistances, which we can choose to turn around in favor of the good. So let me share with you a little story that just happened last week around this idea and how you can practically, in a very practical way, take your fears, resistances, you could even call it anger, anything that's any afflictive emotion, and change it and channel that power for the good. So I was in this is going to be a fairly mundane example, but it nevertheless is a conscious one, which is why I bring it up. So last week, I'm working with a team of people to create a new online educational program. And it's a very high priority project. And there's a lot of actually anxiety around it, because there's a deadline that everyone wants to meet, and there's kind of some other external pressures to get this thing done. So there's just a lot of energy around this project. And we had a project meeting last week around this. And we were talking about this project, but then for some reason, the conversation started shifting to another sub-project, not related to this at all, but having to do with a certain web page, and the photo wasn't lined up with the heading. It's a really mundane thing, right? And all of a sudden, there's this conversation that develops around this sub-project that has nothing to do with the priority, the high priority project that we've all been told we have to get done. And I felt myself reacting to it. And I started having this inner rage about getting off track. Because all I've been hearing for the last few weeks is that, well, we've got to get this educational program done, and we need to focus, and we just need to hunker down and do it. And then all of a sudden, the conversation drifts off to something completely unrelated and completely low priority. I felt myself reacting to it. I reacted internally, not externally. There's a little inner dialogue going on about, like, these people are crazy, what are they thinking? What a bunch of morons. And I'm like, okay, so I sat with that for a bit. So I reflected on that as well. I was aware of my reactivity, and then I reflected on it. And I allowed myself to feel it. So I didn't resist it. I let myself feel it, and then I took a deep breath at the end of all that. And then finally, after reacting, reflecting, and then I responded. And I chose to redirect all of that power, all that energy, because it was a lot of energy. And I was like, what the heck are we doing? And I chose to redirect that energy, my power, to make a focused and direct suggestion. I said, pardon me, everyone. It seems to me that we've been talking for the last several weeks about the importance of this educational program. And now it seems like we've gotten completely derailed by this minor other low priority project that has nothing to do with this thing that's deadline driven. And I said, I think we should save this discussion for another time. And because that suggestion was fueled by a conscious redirection of power and not by emotional reactivity, people were able to hear it and said, you know what, you're right. We can let this go for a while. When we came back to the other project. So consider for a moment that our fears and resistances, rage even, are those that it's a expression of our power in some way. those fears and resistances are actually calling us to evolve. And that process of reacting, at least internally, reflecting and then responding from true power is the way we evolve. And this is not always easy to do. Because those fears and resistances have power, like we're wrestling, right, with that power. And sometimes that power gets the better of us, and that's when the rage gets externalized. Yet, what I would invite us all to do in those instances is to sit with the reaction and actually love it. Have love for the reaction, have compassion for the power within ourselves. And then once we reflect on it, we can respond from a deeper spiritual place. And then the power becomes unstoppable, truly. Because when that power is coming from a place of love and it's heart-centered, we can speak boldly. Doesn't always mean being like a nice guy. But we can speak boldly and confidently, and we can do it with compassion. And then when we express from that place, we evolve spiritually. So those fears and resistances are really our lower brain's attempt to preserve the familiar. And to preserve even like what our past lives have been like. Right? There's a fear of change. There's actually a fear of evolving because we don't know what the future holds. We know what's been in the past. So even if we come from a place where somebody treated us poorly in a relationship, well, we know what that's like. So I know what I'm going to get, so I can stay here. But to contemplate moving on is scary because we don't know what the future holds. Am I lovable? Will anybody like me or love me again? Right? Or the job. Like, I've been in this, job for 20 years, for instance. God forbid I should leave because I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it out there again. And I'm not suggesting we all leave here and do like a whole bunch of rash things. Again, this demands our conscious attention, a conscious use of power. But just realize you need not be prisoners to your fears and resistances, but take a different look at them. Take a conscious look at them and understand that those fears, resistances, that rage, anger, whatever it is actually calling you to evolve. So those fears and resistances are part of our lower brain's attempt to preserve the familiar. Yet we do live in this moment. And our conscious thoughts and actions actually are creating the future. So if we're in the job, the relationship, if we're in the spiritual or religious space that doesn't serve anymore, and we desire to shift it, our thoughts and our consciousness are actually creating the future. It's a call from the future is another way you can look at it. The future is calling us to evolve. So rather than fear the future because we don't know what it holds, we can shift our thinking to, well, the future is actually inviting us forward. It doesn't want to drag us back, but it's inviting us forward. So indeed, the future, in a sense, is supporting us in conscious choice. And when Jesus rose and resurrected and Mary came to him and saw him, it was like, my God, he's alive. She fell to his feet and he said, don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended. Metaphysically, we can look at that as, don't cling to me because you're clinging to a past vision. And our past self keeps us from evolving. That's the ascension. And with that, I'd like to take us into our meditation. And just feel yourself present in this moment, just breathing into your physical being. Allow the gravity of the earth to hold you gently where you're seated. Just take comfort right now that you don't have any other obligation other than to be here right now. And with every inhale, feel deeper and deeper into your power. With every inhale, feel deeper and deeper into your choice. Your choice to evolve. And as you fully embrace conscious choice, as you embrace the divine design that you are here to evolve as a spiritual being having a human experience, in this moment, should you choose, you can make a covenant with the divine that your fears, your resistances, your afflictive emotions are signals and encouragements to take their power and to transmute them for your own benefit. It's all energy. And in this covenant, you choose to express the energy for the greatest good. And you honor that energy. And you embrace that choice for yourself. And you understand that each person on earth has the agency to make that same choice for his and herself. And the only work that you individually need concern yourself with is your own choice. And what a relief that is to meditate on that for a moment, that the choice, your choice, is your choice and yours alone. No one else need make it for you. And you need not make the choice for anyone else. And we understand that through the power of our conscious choice, we have an exponential impact on the expression of power and love in the world. And through the omnipresence of the Spirit, we accept the truth as well that we are never alone, even though we may feel it from time to time as we express our greater selves. And simply through the power of conscious choice and that the way you show up in the world, you serve as a powerful example of Christ consciousness at work. And in this moment, by making that conscious choice, you are raising not just your vibration, but the vibration of this collective in the room, everyone gathered here. And as we feel together into the raised vibration of this meditation on conscious choice, we can feel the resonance rippling out from beyond this room and throughout the community and ultimately the world. And by coming from this higher place in consciousness and showing up wherever it is that we are called, we each individually and we all collectively serve as an example of what's possible. And showing up and being that example is perhaps the most powerful thing we can do to express Christ consciousness in the world. And isn't it a relief that we need not do this through logic or argument or trying to convince anyone or manipulate, but simply by showing up from a center of love and a pure expression of our power. We need not be attached to the outcomes because it's not up to us egoically to shift, to change the consciousness of the world. Yet the power and the intention that we each have as we show up is really the agent of change. So I invite us all to sit with that as the truth for a few moments in the silence. And then very gently begin to bring your awareness back to your embodied self. Just feel your back against the chair. Feel your feet planted on the ground. Just feel the air swirling around you in the room. And when you're ready, open your eyes, be here, and be aware right now.